Okay, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. If you're okay, please sum up. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, very nice meeting you all. It's unfortunate that I cannot meet you in person, but I'm glad that we finally meet at least online. And I'm sure you are very much excited to meet all your friends, and I hope you enjoy your discussions. But at the same time, I hope you enjoy the lectures, including mine. And today I will be talking about SDGs. I think everybody knows what SDGs are. However, I just would like to share some idea. What is the philosophy behind these international goals? Okay, why we need such goals, and then what these goals means. Then also, since this year you are focusing on the issue of education, I really would like to discuss about the roles of education in the era of SDGs. Why we need to promote education around the world, okay, in order to realize the SDGs. Then finally, I will touch upon some issues relating to the impact of the COVID-19 to the education sector today, which is the main theme you must be discussing about. Okay, so let me start my lecture. What is the key messages of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? It's talking about the limited resources available on the globe, how we can allocate these resources in an equitable manner. This equity is a key word for the SDGs. There's a difference between equality and equity. And then equity means more important, which I will discuss later. Okay? And also, through the thinking of what the SDGs means, we should redefine the meanings of prosperity, well-being, happiness, wealth, and so on and so forth, which I will discuss later as well. But these are the key points I really would like to discuss with you today. Okay? But first, I really would like to talk about the philosophy behind this international goal. So I will start with a strange figure. Okay? What this means. In the history of humankind, or history of this whole world, people used to perceive the way human beings are, or the way the society is, in this way. You start from somewhere and then ending somewhere. So humans, we are born and die. Or in the hundreds of years ago, people even didn't know that this world is a globe. People used to believe, this is just a flat, and then there's a land and the ocean, and then there must be somewhere the end of the world. So at that time, people always had a very simple mindset. Things start from somewhere and end somewhere. Okay, but this is very worrisome. Why? Because after ending somewhere, what's going to happen? For instance, after you die, what's going to happen? So people started thinking in this way. This is called cyclical model. Some of you may be Buddhist. In the Buddhist philosophy, we have the so-called reincarnation. We are born, but die, but we reborn, right? So I'm a human. Maybe in my previous life, I was cockroach. Or maybe I was very extremely good cockroach, so I could become a human. But what this cyclical model means? Cyclical model means, we repeat again and again and again. For instance, in the past, if your grandfather was farmer, your father will become farmer, you become farmer, your son will become farmer, your grandson will become farmer, so on and so forth. You just repeat same thing. Same for women. If your grandmother was working as a household chore, and then mother did the same, you did same, your daughter, your granddaughter, everybody kind of doing same. So up to the time called modernity, okay, the modern period. Modern period starts around the turning of the 19th century. Up to that, up to the era of modernity, people used to believe, this cyclical model. However, in the modernity, people changed their mindset to this model, okay? Notion of development, or we can call notion of progress. We are always making progress, okay? Because, for instance, the Industrial Revolution took place around the turning of 19th century. Because of the technological advancement. Your grandfather was a farmer, but now your father working in the factory, and you may be working in the office, okay? Becoming office work and so on. When you move around, it took a week to walk. But now, because of the invention of the steam engine, you can travel in one day. So this is the notion of progress. Okay? Today is better than yesterday. Tomorrow, a year later, 10 years later, 100 years later, we must continue making progress. However, was that true? It's not really true. Okay, people started raising questions about this in the 20th century. For instance, even early 20th century, people started questioning about the way people work in the factories. Now, as workers in the big factories, you may be doing something different from your father, but the way you are working may not be as good as your father did. Because sometimes, you work very severe conditions in the factories. So people started recognizing the issues of human rights, okay? And then this kind of discussion started in the 20th century. And then particularly in the middle of 20th century or late 20th century, what happens in the particularly environmental sectors, people recognized that as a response to making progress, we are actually damaging environment. Okay, we may manufacture the automobile, which makes us easier to travel. However, that in the process of making an automobile, you may be damaging the environment. Throwing the bad air, bad water to the nature. So people started raising questions whether we are making the progress or not. So we had to make a distinguishment between the growth and development. In the past, people used to believe, the quantitative expansion is good. However, is that always good? Okay, and then you start thinking of the quality of your life, quality of society. Okay, quality of the way you produce your goods and products. So we started this kind of discussion in the 1950s, 60s in particular, and 70s. Okay, and you may have heard the report called "Limits of the Growth," okay, written by the Club of Rome. That's a group of the top scientists who got together during the 1960s that they warned the international community that the globe, our world, has been facing severe problems due to the lack of enough resources to support the life of everyone on the globe. So we continued discussions throughout the 1970s, and then UNEP, for instance, UN Environmental Program, was established in the early 1970s. And then, UN in particular continued the discussions during the 1980s, and then came up with this definition of the sustainable development, right? You are quite aware of this. In this definition, they have two directions to see the situations. One is equity between the generations, okay? We have to make people, we have to maintain the people's prosperity or well-being across the generations. So that relates more about issues of environment or natural resources. But also, we have to think of the equity within the generations. Of course, across the generation means, if we damage the environment today, our, sons, grandsons, great-grandsons and daughters, these, kids will suffer in future. That's the equity between the generations. But also, some countries are rich, people living in some society are rich, and people living in some societies, they are quite struggling from the economic shortage and bad life conditions. You think that's very sustainable? It's not really sustainable. So equity within the generation relates to the issue of poverty, financial disparities of the financial allocations, okay, and so on and so forth. So the SDGs really warned us that we are facing these two directions of the problems, equity between and within generations. But why this happened? Because this is quite a simple figure that on this globe, the humans form the society. So, and then in this society, we commit to the economic activities. And we are surrounded by the nature and the environment, okay? And what was that? Up to the middle of the 20th century, the number of world population was still limited, and then the size of the economic activity was limited. So we had a lot of space on the globe. But what happened during the last few decades? Now, we have over 7 billion population on the globe. And the size of the globe hasn't changed much. So what this means, we don't have enough space, okay? So we are really, having the shortage of the resources surrounding, in the surrounding environment. So environmental issue has been highlighted the most. However, it's not only the problems, because there are different problems we are facing, which include economic, environmental, societal, geopolitical, and technological problems. So these are just examples of the challenges we are facing today. So that's why, as you know, the SDGs came up, right? Have you ever thought of this, logics of the SDGs? This logo, right? On the first line, in the first line, what this means, this is a basic needs for human to survive. These are issues of poverty, hunger, health, education, so on, okay? These are humans to survive. This, first line shows the basic needs for the human. So first line actually, very much coincides with the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, which was set in 2000s, right? The MDGs mainly targeted people in developing countries because in 2000s, the international community recognized the people in the developing countries really struggled to survive. So that's why the international community came up with 8 goals of Millennium Development Goals, which is almost same as this, first 6 goals on the first line of SDGs logo, okay? But then 2015, the UN came up with Sustainable Development Goals, okay? Why? Because now the global challenges are not only for people in developing countries. No matter where you are, you have to deal with a lot of different global challenges. But then again, the environmental challenges are the most highlighted because as you can easily imagine, environmental problems, you don't really concern about the borders, The borders of the nation states doesn't matter for the environmental problems. But it's not only environmental problems, the economic problems, for instance, because we are now talking about so-called globalized economies. So, economic activities has been very, very closely connected across the borders. politically as well. Okay, some of you are from the Southeast Asian countries. For instance, ASEAN, you established so-called ASEAN community in 2015. Why you needed ASEAN community? Because the economic ties among the 10 ASEAN nations, So economic is also a very important field. But at the same time, society, okay? People are living in this globalized world. And we have a lot of people moving around, the migrations and so on. So you cannot just discuss the issues within the framework of the nation state. You have to think of across the borders. So the second line, you are now talking about the societies. Okay? First line is human, and the human forms, we are composed of the society. Okay? The society, how society should be, what sort of economic activities we should do, what the cities are. So people, society, and the last line, the third line, is environment. The society cannot be sustained if environment is not sustainable. This environment is not only the natural environment, but also like the goal 16, the peace. Peaceful environment in the international community is very important to sustain your society. So these are the logics of the SDGs. But I also like this logo, which I have here as well. The logo, new logo of it's relatively new, this logo. I prefer this logo. Why? Because SDGs are not only limited to the 17 goals. From the beginning, the UN always told us that you have to translate these 17 goals in the context of your own society. Because if you go back to this, 17 goals, for some country, some goals are more important than the other. For instance, in Japan, of course, we have still having the education problems, but the education goal is relatively less important, probably, comparing to, for instance, gender. In Japan, gender is more problematic. Okay? I'm not saying education is not a problem in Japan. We have problems, but at the same time, each country, each society has a different ways to translate these 17 goals. So that's why UN is saying you have to come up with your own goals, okay, on the top of these 17s. 17s are just the references, okay? 17s are not perfect, okay? Actually, in the UN, after the adoption of SDGs, some international UN agency, they were shocked. They recognized that they made a mistake. Can you imagine what sort of mistake? This was UNESCO. The UNESCO? UNESCO is in charge of supervising this, the so-called World Heritages. They are really paying a lot of attention on the cultural heritage. And then UNESCO recognized they forgot to include culture as one of the goals among the 17 goals. But culture is very important to make this society sustainable. Understanding different cultures, accepting different culture is very important to keep this society very sustainable. But UNESCO forgot. But that's all right. That's all right. There are probably many more issues which are not included in 17 goals, but you can come up with these important goals, important issues you have to deal with. So that's why I like this circle, because circle has been divided in 17 colors at this moment, but you can actually divide many different colors, okay? But at the same time, circle is only one. What's the ultimate goal to promote SDGs? To realize peace. Okay? Peace is the ultimate condition to make our world more sustainable, right? So there is the discussion about SDGs. So let me move on to the issue of education, okay? So let me switch to the issue to the education. So what is the education situation around today? At the time of 2000s, the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, were adopted. The issue in education sector was more about access, okay? Excuse me. Many people didn't have access to educational opportunities. At that time, for instance, more than 110 million primary school-aged kids were out of school. They couldn't go to school, primary school, more than 110 million, which halved in 2015, became half. So still 50-some million students are out of school in the time of 2015, but the number became half, while over the years from 2000 to 2015, the number of children increased, but the number of children who cannot attend the primary school decreased significantly. These kids who are out of school today are mainly in the conflicted areas and the very severe economic conditions in developing countries. Okay? So we still have the problem of access, but there is another problem occurred. What is another problem? That's a quality. Okay? First, you have to assure the access to educational opportunities. But then now schools are having many, many students. For instance, particularly in Africa, many students are now in schools. Why? Because of MDGs, many governments in Africa made primary schooling free of charge. So many kids now attend the primary school. So what happened? 80 or 100 students are packed in small classroom. So they cannot really learn. So the quality of teaching and learning is very low. So now issue is shifting towards from access to quality. Okay? But still access is problem, but we have more problem about quality. Okay? And then also, when we think of the access, there is still the issues of economic disparities and the gender disparities. Okay, we have to solve. Okay, so still very poor people from the poor families, they cannot have enough educations. Why education is so important? For instance, this is a simulation the World Bank did before. In sub-Saharan Africa, many kids die before they become the age of 5. Then this simulation shows that if mothers receive primary schooling, the number of kids die decrease slightly. But then if all the mothers receive at least the secondary level of educations, the number of kids who die before the age of 5 will become half. Why? This is very interesting because you can imagine you are now high school kids. Do you study how to raise kids? How to raise kids? You don't, right? But if you receive more education, your kids don't die. Why? Because you know how to get information, necessary information to take care of your kids. So, those who haven't received enough education, they don't know how to deal with the problems when the kids face. However, if you have education, you know the way to find the solutions. Okay? That's the power of education. Okay? The education doesn't directly teach how to raise kids, but education really teaches you how to find enough, important and necessary information to take care of your kids. So this really shows, the power of education. Here's another issue, because people don't have enough knowledge, what happens? For instance, today we have the issue of obesity. This is shocking data. The kids in developing countries are becoming fatter. Okay. The obesity is an issue of fat. Why? This is also the issue of access to quality. Before, people in developing countries are having difficulty to have access to foods. So hunger is the main issue. But today, people have access to foods, but the quality of foods are not good, and the way they eat is not good. because they don't have a good health literacy. How nutrition, you have to, what sort of nutrition you have to take. You don't know it. So what you do? The parents just feed your kids with the junk food, okay? Very low quality but cheap food. And then they become fat. Okay, here's these are just examples, but that's why you need educations, okay? And then also, I just wanted to highlight the importance of education, in the era of SDGs. But then also, in this era of SDGs, this is the time that things changes so rapidly, okay? And then technological advancement, the pace of technological advancement becomes so much accelerated, okay? And what the change is? For instance, the AI, automated intelligence. Basically many jobs are taken replaced by the machines, okay? The technology can do so many things. So the jobs left for humans are something, requires more complicated works. And then these changes has been so much accelerated. The pace has been very fast. So when I was your age, I'm almost 50 today. So over 30 years ago, okay, over 30 years ago, that means around the 1990s, okay, before even 1990s. There were no jobs about internet or mobile phones at that time. However, now you have many jobs relating to these fields. You may have heard about the very famous report published by the team of scholars of the Oxford University. They published a report about 4 or 5 years ago. They looked at North America, the jobs available in North America, the US and Canada, in 2015. Almost half of these jobs will disappear in 2030. Have you ever heard this report? Okay, but you may have heard probably similar stories. Many jobs are disappearing because of the technological advancement. Okay, so for instance, that's the example of the internet or mobile phone. Okay, I mean, you will see these technological changes, and you have to be responsive to that. And what this means to education. The education you are receiving now, okay, you have to study, you have to memorize many things, right? I mean, in order to pass the test and then in order to pass the entrance exam and so on. So you must be studying hard with your textbooks. But the contents of the textbook can be easily outdated. Okay, 5 years, 10 years later, what you studied may not be directly relevant to the situation in 5, 10 years later. Can you imagine that? So you don't have to study? No, you have to study. Why? Because now you are now doing the exercise to build up your foundation, the intelligence. Foundations for your intelligence. Okay, so you have to study, but simply memorizing the knowledge or simply acquiring the skills from the textbooks or the lesson you take at the schools are not enough. These are, of course, very important. For instance, if you are the athlete, if you play football, the soccer, you cannot use hands, but at the same time, you have to do the exercise with your upper body as well, right? If you use only the legs to play, you can also use head as well. But at the same time, you are not allowed to use your arms, but still you have to do the exercise for arms as well, because you have to have a good muscle to have a good balance in your body. Same thing for the studies. You have to study, but at the same time, you really have to think of what sort of study it has to be. Then I will show you that this learning shift will take place. what this means, the things are becoming, easily outdated. Sorry. For instance, in the 90s, middle of the 90s, the UNESCO said, you have to learn to acquire knowledge. That means learning to know. And then you have to learn to acquire skills. That's learning to do. And knowledge and skills you get, but how to use it? You have to live with some other people. And also, you have to use these knowledge and skills to be yourself. Okay? And some of you are connected, but seems to be some of you have been disconnected. But okay, I will continue. Okay, okay. Let me come back. So basically, why we have to learn? Because we have to learn to know, to do, to live together, and to be yourself. But at the same time, today it's not enough. In 1990s, at that time, learning has been considered very static, okay? Meaning that the knowledge and skills you acquire should be effective for next 20, 30, 40 years, okay? So if you go to the good school, okay, study hard, those knowledge and skills be effective during next 20, 30 years while you are working. But today is not. Okay? Today, the things changes so fast. So the learning today has to be very dynamic, means learning to transform yourself and society. So this means, you may not be learning, when you are learning, when you are studying, there may not be single answer. There may be many answers, or even there may not be any answer. But you have to think how to deal with. Okay? That's the error of SDGs. You have so many answers, or sometimes you cannot find out any answers, but you have to deal with the situations. So what to do? Okay? So your learning has to be, just being the very, passive to receive knowledge and skills. But you have to be, very proactive. Okay? Not the passive, but very active to learn. Okay, so that's the reason why I mentioned about the power of education. You are learning to do your learning by yourself, autonomously. So that's why I mentioned about taking care of small kids. You don't learn how to take care of or raise your kids in school, but you learn is to find the proper knowledge, necessary skills to take care of your baby. Okay, so that sort of learning you are expected to do. And then this opportunity itself, actually, this program is also, the way we expect you to learn. Okay, because here in this program you don't have any single answers. You have to look for the answers, right? Through the various different means, okay? Through the discussion with your friends, but also you have to explore all the information on the website. But you have to be very careful because sometimes wrong information is available on the website, which is called involutions, okay? And why you are learning? You have to be very careful about this, okay? I mentioned very early in this lecture, the SDGs emphasize the importance of equity. And this really shows the figure on the left-hand side, equality, doesn't help someone who is most needed, right? So that's why you have to distribute the resources in an equitable manner, like the figure in the middle, right? But this middle is not enough. This may not be sufficient. Why? Because for this small kid on the standing on the two boxes, he or she may feel very, worried because doesn't like to stand in a very high stage, or he or she may feel, uncomfortable because he or she is receiving more than others. Okay, so you've been treated differently from others. So you may not feel very comfortable. That's why you have to go the right-hand side. You have to change the system itself. Education is the way, okay? Education, through the education, you find a way to change the system, okay? So this is what we are expecting to you to become a global leader in the future, to find out to change the system like this. I hope this is clear to you, okay? And let me just, then in order to change the system, you have to really make the innovations. But innovation doesn't always take place in developed countries. Nowadays, there are many innovations we find in developing countries. Do you know why? Because many issues raised by SDGs are more happening in the context of developing countries. For instance, biodiversity, global warming, okay, economic, financial inequalities, okay. All these issues are more visible in developing countries. So people in developing countries know more about the phenomena, and then you have more chance to make innovation as well. So this is so-called reverse innovation. You can influence to, actually people in developing countries can influence to the people in developed countries, okay? So let's, I have a few more minutes to conclude. So let's discuss a little bit about the COVID-19. I understand that you have all these slides, and many slides are actually self-explanatory. So I don't go details, okay? Just I like to highlight, what is happening, and particularly, the developing countries are really struggling due to this COVID-19. But at the same time, this COVID-19 really made all of us, somehow treated equally. What that means, almost all the countries closed the schools. This is a very unlike phenomena we never experienced. So kids in developed countries couldn't go to school during the difficult time, including Japan, right? And here is a message of SDGs. SDGs ask us to recognize the problem and the issues raised by SDGs as a problem of yourself, not the problem of others. While MDG was there during from 2000 to 2015, many people, or most of the people in developed countries thought, this is just the problem in developing countries. But SDGs are problems for everyone, okay? And then we have to recognize problem as ours. That's our problem, not their problem, okay? And then this COVID-19 really forced us to think in this way. So I have very, very, negative feelings, and I feel very sad. But at the same time, at least, something COVID-19 did, I don't say good, but somehow, I may be able to consider slightly positively is that, this phenomena really made us think that we have to accept the problems as our own problem, okay? But actually, the way problem happens are not exactly same, like this. If you see this, many schools are closed, and then many countries introduced the distance learning or remote learning. But only developed countries, the students could enjoy using the online teaching and learning, okay? Many kids in developing countries, they didn't have enough access to these. Or even in developed countries, some kids in very economically poor families, they don't have enough access to internet, even in Japan. So inequality actually widened during the phenomena of COVID-19 and the school closures. Also, we had a lot of problems associating with the school closure. For instance, health issues. Many kids coming from the severe, difficult socioeconomic backgrounds, the school lunch was a very important way to get, to have better food for their health, but they couldn't have such access. Or in Japan, there are some abuse for the kids, and they don't have space in their own home. So the school was actually the place for them to escape, but school was closed, and then kids didn't have anywhere to go. Many different problems. I don't have enough time to raise all these, but the message I really like to share with you is the last one. Okay, in this lecture, I kind of did in very rush, so I'm sorry I skipped many slides, but many slides are self-explanatory, as I said. So I would encourage you to read later. But I hope you believe the power of education, and then you are the ones who make the change. You are the ones who make innovations. Okay, and then the key message, as I said, I really would like to repeat again. SDGs is really telling us to recognize various challenges as problems of your own, okay, not someone else. Okay, and I'm sure that you will be talking about the law, how the school are affected, how education was affected by the COVID-19, but at the same time, how the education or schools respond to solve this situation as well. You will be probably discussing more among the groups. And when you discuss, I really would like to encourage you to be innovative, okay? Many ideas, you should have, some people may laugh when you say something, big. But, without having a big mindset, you can really change the system, okay? So this figure is really something I would like you to bear in your mind while you will be discussing with your friends in this program. But at the same time, after the program as well. Again, thank you very much. I was a bit rushed, but I hope, my message was clear to you. And I now would like to hear your comments or questions. So I would like to stop my lecture here, and then let's move on to the question and answer sessions. Thank you.